There, I'm a 36-year-old father, and I've been divorced from my ex-wife for 4 years now. We have a 10-year-old son together and share a formal 50-50 custody arrangement that was court-ordered during the divorce. Things weren't always smooth between us, so a year into the custody agreement, the court suggested we use a co-parenting app to handle all communication. No texts, no calls, just everything documented in the app, which I've stuck to ever since. I've always taken my parenting seriously. I help my son with his homework, stay on top of his assignments, and regularly communicate with his teachers. I attend every school event I'm scheduled for, plays, conferences, family reading nights, and even classroom volunteer days when they allow it. I've never missed a parent-teacher conference, and the staff at his school knows me by name. 2 years ago, my ex-wife got remarried. Her new husband is part of a very close, very involved family. From what I can tell, they see themselves as co-parents even though they're not. Over the past year and a half, I started noticing them more and more at school events. His mother and father show up for everything: plays, art shows, even PTA fundraisers. It's like they're trying to build a new version of family and have decided I don't fit in it. I didn't say anything for a long time. At school events, I'd keep things polite, even when the looks they gave me were anything but. I didn't want to make a scene or give anyone a reason to say I was difficult. I just focused on my son and stayed in my lane. I figured the school knew who the legal parents were, and the rest didn't matter. Last week, a parent-teacher conference was scheduled. It fell on one of my custody days, and I immediately confirmed that I'd attend. That same afternoon, I got a message in the co-parenting app. My ex-wife asked me not to come. She wrote that she had already planned to attend the conference with her husband and his parents, and that my presence would make things uncomfortable. She said the school only needed one parent present, and since the others had already made arrangements, it would be better if I sat this one out. I double-checked the calendar. It was still my custody day. I reread the court order. I still had equal legal authority in all educational matters. None of that had changed. I messaged her back, telling her I would be there. I reminded her that parent-teacher conferences are meant for legal guardians, and that extended family members, no matter how involved, do not have decision-making rights. Her reply came quick. She said that her husband's family had earned their place, and that I was being difficult on purpose. According to her, I was just showing up to create a scene, not because I cared about our son's schooling. She insisted that I should stay home for the sake of peace. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I called the school and asked if there were any limitations on who could attend the conference. The front office staff told me I was absolutely allowed to be there. They did mention that when multiple family members show up, it can get chaotic, and they asked that we be respectful of everyone's time and space. I told them I understood and confirmed my name on the schedule. That night, I went back into the app and let my ex-wife know that I had spoken with the school. I told her again that I was attending, that I had questions for the teacher, and that I wasn't going to be pushed out of my own child's education. She didn't respond until the next morning, and when she did, the message was a wall of text accusing me of being combative, jealous, and attention-seeking. She ended it by saying I was putting my ego above our son's needs. I didn't bother arguing with her. The reality was simple. I was showing up for my son, the same way I always had. I wasn't going to let myself be pushed aside because someone else's parents decided they wanted a front row seat in a role that was never theirs to begin with. Still, I knew this wasn't the end of it. If they were trying this hard to remove me from something as basic as a conference, things were going to get worse before they got better. So I documented everything. I screenshotted the app messages, saved the school's confirmation email, and notified my lawyer just in case. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't about to disappear from my son's life either. The conference was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I cleared my work schedule, arranged to be there early, and told myself to stay calm no matter what happened. It was my legal right to be there. It was my son's education, and I had every intention of showing up. I showed up to the school 20 minutes early. Before heading to the classroom hallway, I stopped at the front desk and asked them to confirm that I was listed as one of the legal guardians for the conference. The secretary checked the system, nodded, and said everything was in order. She handed me a visitor sticker like always, and I walked down the main corridor toward the classroom. When I turned the corner, they were already there. My ex-wife, her new husband, and his parents. All four were standing just outside the classroom door, talking quietly. The husband's father glanced at me and made a comment under his breath. I didn't respond. I kept walking and leaned against the wall across from the classroom. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't say a word to them. A few minutes later, the teacher stepped out of the room. She froze for a second when she saw all of us. It was clear from her face that she hadn't expected both parents to show up with an entourage. She looked at me, then at them, and suggested that maybe it would be better to split the meeting into 2 sessions, one for each side. My ex-wife cut her off and said everyone could be civil, and there was no need to divide it. I agreed to go in together. Not because I wanted to, but because the teacher already looked stressed, and I didn't want to make it worse. We all filed into the room. The 4 of them sat on one side of the table. I took a seat opposite the teacher. She pulled out a few folders and started reviewing my son's academic performance. Most of it was fine, but she paused when she got to math. She said he was falling behind in problem solving and often got distracted during lessons. I brought up that I'd noticed similar things at home. He'd lose focus even during basic assignments and often forgot instructions halfway through. I mentioned that I had similar attention issues as a child, and that it might be worth doing a formal academic evaluation just to rule anything out. Before the teacher could respond, my ex-wife's husband jumped in. He claimed our son was just bored because he was too advanced and needed harder material. The teacher politely redirected the conversation, saying attention challenges can sometimes look like boredom but still require support. Then the husband's mother spoke up. She warned against labeling kids too young and said testing would follow him for life. She talked about how labels do more harm than good and said the boy was just going through a phase. The teacher explained that a formal evaluation couldn't even begin unless both legal parents agreed in writing. I gave my consent immediately. My ex-wife looked uncomfortable. She didn't say anything for a while, just stared down at the floor. After a few seconds, she nodded slightly and mumbled something about wanting to think about it more later, but she didn't object outright. The teacher wrote down that both legal guardians had verbally agreed, and she would send home a consent form. The meeting ended about 10 minutes later. We stood up, and the teacher thanked us all for coming. I walked out first, not wanting another awkward hallway scene. But as I passed near the husband's parents, the father stepped in front of me. He told me I was driving a wedge between them and their grandson. His wife added that I was making everything about control. I didn't argue. I told them that school matters were between me and my son's mother, no one else, and that the rest needed to respect that. Then I walked away without waiting for a reply. That evening, I received a message in the co-parenting app. My ex-wife accused me of deliberately undermining her in front of her family and said I had embarrassed her. She claimed I was trying to make her look like an unfit parent just to win some imaginary battle and warned me that if I kept disrupting the peace, she would explore legal options to limit my involvement. I didn't respond. I saved her message in the app, along with prior messages to keep records clear. I had attended a conference I was legally allowed to attend. I had raised a valid concern about our son's academics. I had agreed to proceed together in front of the teacher, and I had remained calm when her husband's parents cornered me in the hallway. If she wanted to turn that into a legal issue, I'd let the court see the full thread for themselves. I wasn't about to get dragged into another emotional battle. My focus was and still is on doing what's best for my son, even if I have to do it while being treated like an outsider by people who aren't even supposed to be in the room. After the conference, I went home and pulled out the custody agreement again. I'd read it before, but I wanted to be sure. The language was clear. As joint custodial parents, both my ex-wife and I held equal rights to make educational decisions. Nowhere in the document did it mention step-parents or extended family having any say. It was all in black and white. I replied to her message in the co-parenting app. I told her that if she truly believed I was violating some legal boundary or interfering with our son's well-being, she was free to pursue it in court, but she had no right to issue ultimatums or try to gatekeep my access to his education based on her family's preferences. 3 days later, I got a call from the school counselor. She said the academic evaluation process had officially started. She thanked me for raising the concerns during the conference and said they'd already begun early observations and would follow up with formal assessments soon. I thanked her for the update and asked to be notified of any results or concerns as they came up. That afternoon, I picked up my son like normal. He climbed into the back seat and didn't say much on the way home. Usually he'd start talking about soccer practice or a funny thing that happened at lunch, but that day he stared out the window. At home, while getting his backpack out, he finally spoke. He said that his step-grandmother told him I always ruin things and that people are just trying to help, but I won't let them. I kept my tone calm, told him not to worry, and reminded him that the grown-ups would handle everything. Once he went to his room, I opened the app and sent a message to my ex-wife. I told her clearly her husband's parents were not to speak negatively about me to our son, ever. It was confusing him and completely inappropriate. She replied a few hours later. She brushed it off, said her husband's family was just being protective, and that I was blowing things out of proportion. She then blamed me for turning everything into a conflict. I didn't argue with her. I went to all the platforms where I was still connected to her husband's parents, family email threads, old social group chats, even the school volunteer sign-up pages, and I blocked them everywhere. Then I emailed the school directly, attaching a scanned copy of the custody agreement, and requested that going forward, only myself and the child's mother be allowed to communicate with teachers, counselors, or attend school meetings. I stated that no third-party family members had authority over school matters and should not be included in any capacity. The school's front office responded the next morning. They confirmed they had updated the contact records and would honor the restriction. They also noted the clarification in my son's student file so that teachers and staff were informed. Later that night, I got another message in the co-parenting app. This time it was long. My ex-wife accused me of trying to isolate her family from our son. She claimed I was being spiteful and said I was cutting out people who have always shown up just because I couldn't handle someone else being involved. She didn't acknowledge anything about the step-grandmother's comment. She just doubled down on the idea that I was using legal boundaries to punish people who care. I didn't respond. I saved the message and added it to the folder where I'd started compiling documentation. Every message, every school update, every interaction, it was all getting recorded now. 2 days later, a mutual acquaintance I hadn't heard from in months sent me a vague text saying he'd heard I was trying to take my ex-wife's son away from her. Not our son, her son. He said there were rumors going around that I was trying to get full custody and that her family was panicking about it. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. We had a quick phone call that night. He told me to keep documenting everything and to stay alert for signs of parental alienation. If people were being told I was trying to steal custody, That meant she was already laying the groundwork for something. That weekend, my son had a soccer match. I showed up on time and found a spot at the far end of the bleachers. I didn't go near anyone. Halfway through the game, I noticed her husband's parents sitting on the opposite end. They were watching me more than the game. At one point, the husband's mother shook her head and whispered something, and the father made a loud comment about how I was trying to take over everything. I didn't react. I kept my phone in my lap and typed up everything I saw and heard in the Notes app. Date, time, what was said, and where it happened. I saved it to the legal folder when I got home. If they were going to keep testing limits, I was going to be ready for the next step. Because one thing was becoming clear, this wasn't just about school anymore. They wanted to erase me from the picture altogether. I got a call from the school during my lunch break. The front office staff wanted to inform me that someone had shown up to sit in on my son's academic evaluation meeting that morning, a meeting I hadn't been told about. When they checked the guest's ID, it turned out to be my ex-wife's husband. He claimed he was there to represent the family, but since he's not a legal guardian, they turned him away and documented the attempt. The school made it clear they would not allow non-parents into official meetings again, and said they'd be updating their system to lock the access list to only me and my ex-wife. As soon as I hung up, I called my lawyer and relayed everything. He added the report to the growing folder we were keeping: messages, school records, app communications, and now an attempted school intrusion by someone without legal standing. That evening, I opened the co-parenting app and drafted a message. I stated clearly that from now on, only legal parents, my ex-wife and myself, were permitted to attend school functions or communicate with school staff. Any exception to that would require written agreement from both of us ahead of time. I included the school's own response and said I expected this boundary to be followed moving forward. The next morning, I received a message where my ex-wife accused me of trying to erase the people who had always loved and supported our son. She said I was trying to punish her family for being more involved than I was comfortable with and claimed I was using school rules to wage a personal war. I didn't respond, I just saved the message like all the others. The next few days, I started noticing strange phrases coming from my son. When I asked if he wanted to stay late for after-school math tutoring, he said, "You just don't want mom to be happy." Another time, he told me I hate her family because they do more fun stuff. I asked him where he heard that, and he shrugged. The language wasn't his. It was word for word what I'd seen in app messages or heard muttered from the sidelines. I contacted the school counselor and asked if she could meet with my son privately for a few sessions. I told her I was worried that things from the adult world were bleeding into how he saw his parents, and she agreed to meet with him once a week for the next few weeks. She also asked me to keep documenting anything I noticed at home and promised to flag anything serious to the school social worker if it came up. Later that week, there was a student art show in the gym. I went, like I always did, and walked around looking at the displays. While standing near the paintings, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Across the gym, the ex-wife's husband's mother was holding her phone up and recording. Not the artwork, me. She was aiming the camera directly at where I stood, slowly panning across while pretending to browse the displays. I didn't confront her. I walked over to the principal and told him what I saw. I reminded him of the prior agreement that only legal parents were to attend events unless joint consent was given. He said he'd follow up. 2 days later, I received an email confirming that a formal warning had been issued to my ex-wife. The school restated that no extended family were allowed at student events, meetings, or functions unless both parents signed off in writing beforehand. The following Friday, I left the gym after my usual evening workout and headed to my car. As I unlocked the door, I heard someone call out from across the lot. It was the husband's father, walking toward me. He said he just wanted to talk. I didn't wait for whatever came next. I got in my car and left. When I got home, I drove straight to the local police station and filed a report. I described the incident, listed the prior interactions, and requested that the incident be logged in case there were future issues. The officer filed it as a harassment concern and gave me a copy of the report. My lawyer sent a cease and desist letter the next day to the husband's parents. The letter made it clear: no more contact, no messages, no approaches, no indirect attempts to get involved through school, events, or mutual acquaintances. Any further action would be escalated to court with a request for a protective order. By the end of the weekend, another message landed in the co-parenting app. This time, my ex-wife accused me of going scorched earth. She said I was weaponizing lawyers to tear families apart, and that I was acting like only my side of the family mattered. I didn't reply. I saved the message and added it to the folder. The rules were now in place. The pattern was documented. The next step, if they pushed again, wouldn't be a warning. It would be filed in court. The school finished the academic evaluation and sent home a written report the following week. It confirmed what I'd suspected for a while. My son was showing signs of attention challenges, including difficulty staying focused in structured classroom settings and inconsistent performance with multi-step instructions. The counselor and teacher both recommended formal classroom accommodations through an individualized education plan, including breaks, guided focus tasks, and optional support time during math. The school provided a packet for both legal parents to sign before they could implement anything. I signed and returned my copy the next day, but a few days went by with no update from the school, and when I followed up, they told me they were still waiting on the other parents' consent. I opened the app and sent a message to my ex-wife asking her to confirm she'd signed. She replied that she wanted to get an outside opinion before agreeing to any educational changes. I told her clearly, If she continued delaying, I would file a motion with the court to compel consent on the basis of medical necessity. The evaluation came from certified professionals, not speculation. There was no time to waste when academic support was involved. 2 days later, she finally agreed to sign on the condition that her husband be allowed to attend school counselor sessions with our son to offer emotional support. I rejected that immediately. I reminded her of the court's previous acknowledgement of legal guardianship limits, the school's own policies, the incident logs we already had, and the fact that the counselor herself had expressed discomfort with his presence in prior messages. I stated clearly, school sessions were between the child and professionals, not the extended family. That weekend, while making a sandwich in the kitchen, my son asked why his grandfather wasn't allowed to help anymore. I asked who he meant, and he clarified that it was his mother's father, the step-grandfather. He said he heard that I didn't let him do anything anymore, and that it made people sad. I told him only parents make school decisions, and both sides want what's best for him, even if they have different ways of showing it. Then I changed the subject. Later that day, I got another notification. My ex-wife had sent a series of screenshots through the app. They were all from social media posts her husband's parents had made. They complained about being banned from their grandson's life, said that they had supported him since he was a baby, and claimed they were being punished for loving him too much. One of the screenshots included a photo of my son taken outside the school building during pickup. The picture had been posted publicly. I forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer. He submitted a DMCA takedown notice to the platform hosting the photo and began preparing a motion to prohibit public sharing of our son's image by anyone not legally authorized. He added the post to our documentation and flagged it as a boundary violation. Around the same time, I got a message through one of my personal social media accounts. It came from a new profile that strongly resembled my ex-wife's husband based on the wording and timing. The wording wasn't subtle. He said I was trying to be the only dad and that our son was going to resent me for pushing people away. I blocked the account permanently and immediately forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer. The following Friday, during our regular custody exchange, I noticed a shift in my son. He seemed distracted, didn't make eye contact, and kept his responses short. I let him settle in once we got home, then emailed the school counselor that evening. I told her about the weekend comments, the recent social media activity, and the messages I had received. She thanked me and said she would begin keeping clinical notes on his emotional state during sessions. A few days later, after observing him and speaking to teachers, she contacted me again. She recommended switching from a co-parenting approach to a parallel parenting model, communication strictly through the co-parenting app, limited only to essential logistics like pickups, drop-offs, and school obligations. The goal was to reduce the exposure to conflict and eliminate opportunities for emotional triangulation. I opened the app and sent my ex-wife a formal proposal to begin parallel parenting. I listed out the structure: no personal messages, no emotional appeals, no involvement from third parties on either side, and no exceptions without written agreement. All communication would remain in the app and would focus only on schedules, school, and health updates. I got no immediate reply, but the message was marked as read. I added the proposal to the documentation folder and sent a copy to my lawyer just in case. The situation had clearly passed the point of trying to maintain a shared approach. It was time to shift to something structured and firm before more damage was done. The child needed peace, not adult politics, and I wasn't going to wait for things to fall apart before drawing the line. My lawyer filed a formal motion requesting court-mandated parallel parenting and an updated custody order. The petition outlined specific boundaries, limiting all school decisions, meetings, and interactions strictly to biological or legal parents. It included documentation of prior interference, screenshots of unauthorized messages, and records from the school showing repeated violations by my ex-wife's husband and his parents. The motion also asked the court to formally restrict third-party participation unless mutually agreed upon in writing. A few days later, my ex-wife was served. In her legal response, she contested the parallel parenting arrangement and requested that her husband be granted limited educational participation rights, including the ability to attend counseling sessions and certain school events. Her argument focused on the idea that he had been a consistent support figure and deserved a recognized role. My lawyer responded with evidence. He submitted a full package to the court: records from the school showing the husband being turned away, the unauthorized attempt to attend an evaluation, and the social media posts made by the husband's parents. He included the harassment report filed at the gym, the cease and desist letter, the counselor's recommendation for parallel parenting, and several co-parenting app messages where emotional manipulation was either reported or implied. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. During the session, the judge reviewed the full file. The school counselor had submitted a letter supporting the switch to parallel parenting, noting the child's increased anxiety due to conflicting adult narratives. The teacher had confirmed improvements in classroom behavior since the boundary changes were first introduced. The court also reviewed the police report, the DMCA takedown for the unauthorized school photo, and the message sent from a disguised social media account. The judge ruled in my favor. The new order clarified that only legal or biological parents may attend school events, engage with school staff, or make decisions related to education and healthcare. It barred all extended family members, including spouses of parents, grandparents, and in-laws, from participating without joint written approval. Additionally, the judge included a clause banning indirect communication through mutual acquaintances and prohibited both parents from using the child to deliver messages or influence the other household. Within 2 days, the school received the court order and sent confirmation that all staff had been briefed. The student file was updated, and the front office confirmed that event access would be limited to names listed on the court document only. A week after the ruling, I got a message from a former mutual friend. He said the husband's parents wanted peace and felt the court had gone too far. He offered to set up a conversation so everyone could clear the air. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent the message to my lawyer, who logged it as another indirect contact attempt in violation of the court's ruling. Not long after that, one of the teachers sent me a short email. She thanked me for stepping in to clarify who could attend meetings and said that since the limits had been set, my son had been more focused and less distracted in class. She also mentioned he seemed more confident answering questions and participating in group work. At home, I noticed small changes. My son started asking things like how he could stay better focused during reading time, or what tricks helped me study when I was young. He started setting out his own clothes for school, organizing his backpack without prompting, and even creating his own flashcards for math. I took the chance to get ahead of things. I contacted a child therapist, someone the counselor recommended, and began sessions to help him develop tools to manage stress and navigate all the family dynamics around him. Soon after, my ex-wife filed a formal grievance with the school board. In her complaint, she accused the teachers and school administration of favoritism against her husband's family. She claimed the school had taken sides and that their policies were being influenced unfairly by personal opinions. The board reviewed the complaint and responded in writing. They referenced the court order and dismissed the grievance entirely, stating that all actions taken had been in accordance with legal requirements and student safety protocols. They reminded both parents that the school's job was to serve the child's educational needs, not family politics. By the end of that month, things finally started to feel different. I wasn't receiving random messages or indirect guilt trips. School events went smoothly. Drop-offs and pickups were uneventful. The co-parenting app remained strictly focused on logistics, nothing more. And my son, for the first time in months, seemed to have some space to just be a kid again. There was still a long road ahead, but the structure was finally in place. And with the noise quieted, my son had a chance to thrive. That was all the reason I needed to keep going. My lawyer called to let me know that my ex-wife had filed a motion to modify the custody agreement. In her motion, she claimed the current structure was too rigid and that it unfairly excluded the emotional support system her family had built. She argued that limiting her husband and his parents from participating was harming our son's emotional well-being, and asked the court to allow her more flexibility in managing his day-to-day life. The court assigned a neutral mediator to assess the entire situation. The mediator's job was to interview both parents, the child's therapist, school staff, and review communication patterns to provide a recommendation on whether changes to the custody structure were necessary. When the mediator met with me, I provided everything I had: logs of co-parenting app messages, school emails confirming incidents, screenshots of boundary violations, and therapist notes showing progress under the current system. I made sure to focus strictly on factual behavior patterns and stayed clear of anything that sounded like personal attacks. The mediator visited the school next. The counselor shared her record showing a clear improvement in my son's focus, participation, and emotional stability since the court had enforced the limits. The teacher confirmed that my son had become more engaged in lessons and less distracted by adult drama. They both supported maintaining the current structure, especially the part that kept all school decisions between legal parents only. The mediator also met with my ex-wife. During her interview, she described their household as a modern village, where everyone contributed and shared the emotional load. She explained that traditional custody models didn't reflect her family structure, and insisted her husband and his parents played a strong support role in our son's life. The mediator noted something different during that visit. My ex-wife's husband's parents were still actively helping with school pickup, organizing activities, and even attending informal school functions without permission. That directly violated the previous court order and school policy. That same week, I received a message from the child therapist. She said my son had missed his scheduled session without notice. I asked if the school had changed anything on their end, and she said no. Later, I found out the missed session happened because my ex-wife's husband brought my son to a birthday party without notifying me or seeking joint consent. The therapist logged it as an unexcused absence and wrote that disrupting the consistency of treatment could slow his emotional progress. She also told me privately that my son mentioned being told not to talk about the party because it would make me upset. That was a serious red flag. I brought it up in the co-parenting app, stating that medical appointments, including therapy, were not to be rescheduled without mutual consent. My ex-wife responded by saying she didn't need to run every move past me and that it wasn't a big deal. I forwarded the full exchange to the mediator and my lawyer. The mediator later compiled a preliminary report and submitted it to the court. The report stated that joint custody should remain in place, but the boundaries set by the last court order needed to be strictly enforced: no extended family participation in school or medical matters, no third-party involvement without written agreement, and no substitution of emotional roles that contradict legal custody terms. Shortly after receiving the report, my ex-wife sent a lengthy message through the co-parenting app. She accused me of trying to erase her husband from the family narrative and threatened to appeal the court's decision. I didn't respond, I forwarded the message to my lawyer and added it to our running documentation of her resistance to the court's rulings. A few days later, my son's teacher pulled me aside at pickup. She said she noticed how much calmer and more focused my son had been lately. He'd started volunteering to help during lessons, was showing more interest in his reading assignments, and hadn't had any behavior disruptions in weeks. She mentioned it casually, but I logged it in my notes that night. The mediator's final report was still pending, but it was clear where things were heading. My ex-wife was likely to push back harder, maybe even file appeals or new motions. But for now, the legal boundaries were in place. The school was enforcing them. The therapist was tracking progress. And my son, for the first time in a long while, had some breathing room. I knew it wasn't over, but I could see the difference structure was making. Not just in how things were being handled, but in how my son was moving through his days, with more confidence, fewer disruptions, and a growing sense that he didn't have to carry the weight of adult issues anymore. A week before the next custody hearing, my ex-wife submitted a new set of documents to the court. Included were written statements from her husband's parents, describing how involved they'd been in my son's life since he was small. There were also photos from past school events, art shows, sports days, even photos taken on campus grounds where I had already filed complaints for unauthorized appearances. Her argument was that these images and testimonials proved the presence of a stable extended support system that the current custody agreement allegedly ignored. My lawyer responded by filing a formal objection. He attached updated reports from the school counselor, the classroom teacher, and the court-appointed mediator. Each one pointed to the same core issue. Too many adult figures with overlapping roles were creating confusion, stress, and emotional inconsistency for my son. The professionals emphasized that legal clarity, especially in educational and medical settings, was essential for the child's development. At the hearing, the judge didn't spend much time reviewing the personal statements from the husband's parents. Instead, he addressed both parties directly. He stated that the focus of the case had officially shifted away from who was more involved or who felt excluded. The new standard was about minimizing emotional disruption and providing the child with a consistent, predictable structure. He reaffirmed that only biological or legal parents could attend school functions, speak with counselors or teachers, and make healthcare decisions, unless there was explicit written consent from both parties. When my ex-wife pushed back, asking why families that provide emotional support should be sidelined, the judge issued a warning. He said that any future attempts to bypass court orders or manipulate legal access through guilt, emotional leverage, or social gatherings could result in sanctions. He also warned both of us not to involve the child in adult disputes, especially in ways that encouraged him to take sides or carry messages. A few days after the hearing, a mutual acquaintance messaged me out of nowhere. He mentioned that the husband's parents were considering filing for grandparent visitation rights, saying they weren't ready to give up. They had apparently spoken with someone who believed they could make a case. I sent the message straight to my lawyer. He acted fast, filing a protective motion with the court that blocked any third-party, non-custodial claims unless backed by a recognized legal precedent. In our state, grandparent visitation isn't automatically granted unless there's estrangement or proof of harm, which didn't apply here. That weekend, I went to pick up my son at the regular time listed in the parenting plan. When I arrived, I found out the drop-off was taking place at a birthday party hosted by my ex-wife's family at a public park. I had not been informed in advance. There were tables, decorations, and several extended family members gathered. I walked up calmly, located my son, and told him it was time to go. The ex-wife saw me and immediately raised her voice, accusing me of ruining the event and saying I could have waited until the party ended. Her parents and in-laws stood around in silence, watching. My son looked frozen in place. I didn't engage. I took my son by the hand and walked him to the car. Later that night, someone who had been at the party sent me a short phone video of the moment. It captured her shouting, the crowd's reaction, and my son looking overwhelmed. I saved it and sent a copy to my lawyer. During the ride home, my son sat quietly. Halfway through the drive, he asked why I always show up when things are just getting good. The phrase hit hard. It wasn't his. It was the same kind of line that had been used before, the kind planted during adult conversations he was never supposed to hear. The next morning, I booked an emergency session with the therapist. I explained everything: the party, the public conflict, the question in the car. She said frequent emotionally charged moments, especially in public settings, could contribute to anxiety, low self-esteem, and long-term emotional confusion for the child. She said the child was beginning to show signs of emotional loyalty conflict. She recommended asking the court to appoint a guardian ad litem, a neutral attorney or child advocate, who could interview both families, observe the home environments, and make a recommendation to the court based solely on what's best for the child. She said it was time for someone with no personal stake in the conflict to intervene and speak for the child directly. I agreed. I contacted my lawyer again and asked him to begin the paperwork. This had gone on long enough. Between the emotional manipulation, the public confrontations, and the constant attempts to pull my son between two narratives, it was clear the usual systems weren't enough. It was time for someone to hear my son's side, without noise, without bias, and without interference. The judge approved the request and officially appointed a guardian ad litem, a neutral child advocate attorney, whose role was to investigate both home environments and report directly to the court. The guardian's mandate was to focus only on one thing: what was in the best interest of the child, without influence from either parent, extended family, or attorneys. Over the following weeks, the guardian visited both households. At my place, she reviewed how we handled daily routines, homework, bedtime, screen time, discipline, and how my son responded to transitions. She attended a scheduled custody exchange to observe our interaction and spoke with my son's therapist, teacher, and school counselor. Every session was fact-based and private, with no room for persuasion or legal talk. She made it clear she wasn't looking for perfect parenting, just stability, boundaries, and emotional safety. She did the same with my ex-wife. The guardian observed the structure of that household, how her husband and his parents interacted with my son, and whether their involvement crossed into areas that conflicted with legal orders. She reviewed social media documentation, unauthorized public appearances, missed therapy sessions, and recordings we had submitted as evidence. None of this was disclosed to either side. She kept everything sealed until the final report. When the next court date came, the judge reminded both of us that from this point on, every decision would be based on the guardian's findings. Personal feelings, parental identity, and arguments about who had done what no longer mattered. The only thing that counted was what served the child's long-term emotional health and academic development. The sealed report was submitted and reviewed in chambers. When the judge returned, the findings were clear. The guardian strongly recommended that all legal and educational decisions remain exclusively between the biological parents, with no room for substitution, exception, or verbal arrangements. The report stated that continued involvement by extended family in decision-making roles had created confusion, emotional tension, and behavioral inconsistencies in the child. The report also recommended alternating major holidays, maintaining equal custody time as previously established, and prohibiting any third-party attendance at school events, therapy sessions, or extracurricular activities, unless both parents provided written consent in advance. Based on those recommendations, the judge issued a revised custody order. The ex-wife's husband's parents were explicitly barred from attending any school functions, public events, or meetings involving our son, unless jointly approved in writing. No exceptions, no gray areas, just a direct ruling. Both my ex-wife and I were ordered to begin individual counseling, focused on conflict resolution parenting. These sessions weren't optional. We were told that indirect manipulation, using the child to communicate, apply guilt, or carry tension, would result in an immediate review of custodial time. The judge said that the child's role was not to protect either household from conflict. If the emotional burden returned, legal privileges would be reevaluated. My ex-wife didn't speak after the ruling. Her attorney asked for time to review the guardian's findings, but no appeal was filed. For the first time in a long while, things didn't escalate after a court decision. The judge signed off, and the orders went into effect the same day. That evening, I picked up my son. The transition happened in silence, but not the heavy kind. It was smooth, no side comments, no cold stares, no arguments. He climbed into the car, buckled his seatbelt, and talked about how his class was starting a new science unit. For the first time in months, there was no tension to cut through. He started attending therapy more regularly. Within a few sessions, he began opening up about how he used to feel caught between both homes. He described how he didn't know what to say around certain people, and sometimes felt like he had to keep secrets to avoid upsetting anyone. The therapist and counselor began working on building communication confidence, teaching him how to express concerns and ask for help without fear of disappointing adults. At home, I set up a few small routines to help him feel safe. We did homework together every evening. He helped plan dinners on Fridays. I limited any discussion about his mother's side of the family, not to avoid it, but to make sure his space with me stayed clear of adult politics. A few weeks later, the school principal reached out. She asked if I'd be interested in helping with a mentorship program for new parents. She said she'd watched the way I handled an increasingly complicated situation without ever causing disruption on campus. I agreed. It wasn't about recognition. It was about helping another parent avoid some of what I'd gone through. All communication with my ex-wife now happens strictly through the co-parenting app. It stays on topic, sticks to logistics, and never goes outside the lines set by the court. Her husband's parents haven't been seen or mentioned since the ruling. No more emails. No more parking lot run-ins. They vanished from our lives without incident. Looking back, being asked to skip that first parent-teacher conference was never just about that meeting. It was about testing whether a father could be pushed aside by people who weren't supposed to have a say. In the end, I didn't have to yell or threaten or compete. I just had to stand firm. And when it mattered most, the court listened. I'm a 27-year-old man, and not long ago, I lost my mom to cancer. It wasn't quick. It wasn't quiet. It dragged on for almost a year. I was the one who took care of her most of that time. I handled her medication, drove her to every appointment, cooked her food when she could still eat, sat with her when the pain kept her awake at night. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I don't regret a second of it. I was there with her when she passed. My relationship with the rest of my family isn't close. My father and older sister have always operated as their own unit. Growing up, they made most decisions without involving me, and that didn't change when my mom got sick. Even during her final months, they'd go behind my back to arrange things like hospice visits or handle paperwork without consulting me, even though I was the one physically caring for her every day. Before she passed, my mom made one request. She wanted her ashes scattered at a cliffside she used to visit as a child. It was a peaceful place overlooking the ocean. She told me it was where she always went when life felt too heavy. I promised her I would take her there. After the funeral, I told my father and sister that I wanted to plan a trip together to fulfill her final wish. At first, my sister agreed. She nodded, said it was a good idea, even said she'd help arrange the trip. But every time I followed up, she brushed it off. She was too busy. She hadn't looked at dates yet. She'd say, "We'll figure it out soon." Weeks passed like that. Then one morning I went to the cabinet where we had stored the urn and it was gone. I hadn't moved it. I asked my dad if he had taken it. No answer. I called my sister. She didn't pick up. I texted both of them in a group chat and neither responded. I waited a few days, confused, thinking maybe someone moved it temporarily. Then I was talking to one of my cousins, someone on my mom's side, and she casually mentioned how beautiful the cliff had looked in the photos she saw online. My stomach dropped. I opened my sister's profile, which I hadn't checked in a while, and there it was. Pictures of the cliff. Photos of my sister, my dad, and our uncle standing at the edge with the urn. One of the pictures even had the caption, "Finally at peace." There were no pictures of me, because I wasn't invited. They had gone without me. I didn't even get angry at first. I just felt hollow. I scrolled through the whole album trying to make sense of it. When I pulled myself together, I messaged the group chat again and asked them straight up why I had been left out. My sister was the first to respond. Her exact words were, "We didn't want to deal with another crying session." A minute later, my dad followed up with, "It was more peaceful this way." That's when it hit me. They hadn't forgotten. They had planned it without me on purpose. They knew how much that moment meant to me. They took it from me because they didn't want to deal with my emotions, because I cared too much, because I had been there too much. I didn't say anything back. I didn't scream or argue. I cut contact with both of them completely and ensured they had no way to reach me. I wanted nothing more to do with them. I didn't even bother reaching out to my uncle. At that point, I didn't know if he had been tricked into it like me, or if he was part of it all along. I just shut the door on all of them. Since then, I haven't spoken to either of them. No calls, no texts, no visits. I made sure they had no way to reach me, and I had no reason to reach out to them. I made my peace with that. That was the last time I let either of them have any part in how I remember my mom. About a week after I blocked my father and sister, I got a letter in the mail, not typed, not emailed, a handwritten note in familiar slanted writing. It was from my uncle. He apologized for how the trip to scatter my mother's ashes had gone and said he genuinely thought I had decided not to come. He wrote that he hadn't known I was being left out. He said he wouldn't have gone if he had known the full story. I didn't reply right away, but a few days later I showed up at his house. I needed to hear it face to face. He looked surprised when he opened the door, but let me in without hesitation. We sat in his backyard, and I asked him straight, did he really think I knew about the trip? He looked uncomfortable and admitted that it was my father and sister who organized everything. They told him I was overwhelmed and didn't want to come, that it was easier this way. He said he was told the trip was already discussed with me and that I had no interest in being there. Once he saw I had no idea what he was talking about, he just shook his head and kept apologizing. I didn't drag the conversation out. I didn't need to. The truth was clear. They made the choice to go without me. Not by accident, on purpose, because it was simpler. At that point, I was already in weekly grief counseling. My therapist had been helping me work through the last year of caregiving and the fallout that came after. I brought all of this up in our next session. She didn't try to justify it or encourage forgiveness. Instead, she told me to think about how I wanted to honor my mom, not based on their version of closure, mine. That night, I remembered something my mom had given me a few weeks before she passed. It was a small silver locket. Inside was a tiny portion of her ashes. She hadn't explained it much, just pressed it into my hand and said, "For later, when you need it." I packed a bag the next morning and drove to the cliff she loved. It was a few hours away, and I didn't tell anyone I was going. I parked at the edge of the old gravel path and walked out to the overlook. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear wind rushing past grass and waves below hitting rocks. I sat for a while before opening the locket. I scattered the ashes there just like she wanted. No speeches, no photos, just me, her, and the wind. I took one picture of the locket before I left. Later that evening, I saved the photo privately. No names, no explanation, just a quiet tribute for myself. Just a quiet tribute. That photo, though private, reminded me to reach out to a few family members on my mom's side. A few cousins and extended relatives from my mother's side saw it and started reaching out. One cousin messaged asking when I went. She thought the trip had happened with the whole family. Another message saying she was shocked I hadn't been included. Apparently, my sister told people I had chosen not to go because I was still processing things. My aunt, my mother's older sister, called me after seeing the post. She was crying before I even picked up. She said no one told her I wasn't invited. She had only agreed to the original trip because she thought I would be there too. She said if she had known, she never would have gone along with it. That weekend, there was a dinner planned at my aunt's house. Just a small get-together for close family. I wasn't sure if I'd go, but she asked me directly. I showed up. Halfway through the evening, my father and sister arrived. My aunt didn't wait. She confronted them in front of everyone, asking why they had left me out. The room went tense fast. My sister claimed I didn't want to go. My aunt cut her off and told her not to lie. There was shouting. Some family members tried to calm it down. My father stayed mostly quiet, but my sister kept pushing, insisting that I had been too emotional and they just wanted things to be peaceful. After the dinner, I started getting messages from an unknown number. It was my sister. She later claimed I was trying to turn everyone against her and that I had twisted the whole situation, but I didn't respond. I didn't answer. I just blocked the number. That made 3 people now: my father, my sister, and now this new number, gone from my contacts for good. The split in the family became obvious. My mother's side stood with me. My father's side brushed it off like it was just a miscommunication. But it wasn't. It was a choice, and I was done pretending otherwise. About 2 weeks after the dinner at my aunt's house, my cousin gave me a heads up. My sister was planning a second memorial. It was supposed to be a public event, open to more extended family and some of our mom's old friends. According to him, she was telling people it was being organized because the first scattering was rushed and I wasn't emotionally stable enough to attend. She said I had removed myself from the family and had chosen not to be involved in any way. That same cousin forwarded me screenshots of messages my sister had sent privately to someone else. In one of them, she wrote that she purposely didn't tell me about the first trip because she couldn't handle my emotions and didn't want me breaking down in front of everyone again. It was pretty clear proof that everything she was saying publicly was a lie. I saved the screenshots and backed them up. I had already started a folder with messages, photos, and anything related to what had happened, just in case this whole thing ever went further. My aunt, the same one who had confronted them at her house, decided to hold a small tribute dinner to honor my mom properly. It wasn't some big announcement or dramatic event, just a quiet evening for those who actually wanted to remember her. She invited me to speak at the end, and I agreed. I didn't plan a speech. I just told a few stories about the months I spent caring for my mom. I talked about small things: her favorite mug, the way she always asked for music in the mornings, how she'd make jokes even when she was too weak to sit up. By the time I was done, almost everyone in the room had tears in their eyes. It wasn't dramatic, it was just honest. Near the end of the dinner, one of my mom's closest friends pulled me aside. She handed me a sealed envelope and said my mom had written it months before she passed. It was meant for me. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I got home, sat down, and read it in silence. The letter was short but said everything I needed to hear. She told me she was proud of me, that she knew I'd be the one to stay by her side. She wrote that she had a feeling things in the family might fall apart after she was gone, and that I should never let anyone push me out of her story. She told me not to let anyone erase the part I played in her life. I added the letter to the same folder with the screenshots. I didn't share it with anyone. It was mine. A few days later, my sister posted a string of vague messages online, stuff about people who can't move on, and those who crave attention from strangers. She didn't name names, but everyone close to the situation knew who it was aimed at. One of my friends, who had seen the screenshots too, commented publicly on her post and attached the original messages where she admitted to excluding me on purpose. That post spread fast among our extended circle. It wasn't some viral moment, but it was enough to cause a stir. A few of her old friends stopped engaging with her altogether. After that, she deactivated her profile for a while. The second memorial she was planning, quietly canceled. No announcement. It just didn't happen. Around the same time, my father showed up at my job. He didn't come in angry or yelling. He just walked into the building like nothing had happened and asked the front desk if he could see me. They called me, and when I came downstairs and saw him standing there, I didn't even speak. I turned around, told reception to get security, and walked back to my office. Security escorted him out without incident. I reported everything and filed it away just in case. After that, I called my lawyer. I didn't want to fight, but I also wasn't going to sit back while people who had already twisted my mom's goodbye tried to paint me as the problem. My lawyer helped me draft a statement. It didn't accuse anyone of anything, but it made it clear that any further attempts to lie about me publicly or show up uninvited in my life would be documented and addressed through legal means. I wasn't trying to make things bigger than they were, but I was making sure I stayed protected. I didn't hear from my sister or father after that. No more messages. No more appearances. If they were still talking, they were doing it behind closed doors. And that was fine with me. About 3 weeks after everything went quiet, I got an email from someone I hadn't heard from in years, a family friend who had drifted away after my mom passed. She wrote that she'd seen some of my sister's old posts online before they got taken down. The tone, she said, felt nasty and passive-aggressive, and it didn't line up with what she remembered about how close I'd been to my mom. She ended the message with a simple line: "This isn't what your mother would have wanted." Attached to the email was a voice recording. It was short, less than a minute, and it was from a group chat she had been added to weeks earlier. In the recording, my sister was joking about how I was too emotional to be around, and that excluding me from the trip was a blessing in disguise. I downloaded it and added it to the folder where I was keeping everything: screenshots, messages, letters. I also saved it to 2 different encrypted backups, just like my grief counselor had advised, one on a secure cloud drive and one on a physical hard drive I kept locked away. Around that time, I was asked to speak at a small fundraiser hosted by the hospice where my mom had spent her final weeks. They wanted someone to talk about the experience of caregiving. I agreed, but kept it focused only on her, what it meant to care for someone you love, the things you don't expect to carry, and the parts you carry forever. I didn't mention anything about my family or what happened after she passed. After the event, a local journalist from a small community paper reached out. She'd been there covering the fundraiser and asked if I'd be willing to share more about my experience not as a headline story, but just for a piece on navigating grief and family roles during loss. I said yes, as long as it was anonymous. She respected that. We spoke for about an hour over the phone, and I told her what it was like to go from being in the room every day to being completely written out afterward. My cousin, the one who had shared the earlier screenshots, told me he'd been fully cut off by my father's side of the family. No one replied to his messages. Group chats went quiet. He stopped being invited to events. Apparently, standing by me made him disposable. We started catching up more regularly, grabbing coffee or just checking in. It helped. He'd been pushed out too, and neither of us had chosen it. A week later, I got another letter, but this time through a lawyer. My father had filed a formal complaint accusing me of slander. He claimed that I was publicly embarrassing the family and misrepresenting events in a damaging way. I didn't even read past the second paragraph. I just handed it off to my lawyer. His response was quick and sharp. He pointed out that I had never named names publicly, had made no false claims, and was speaking from personal experience protected by law. He also added that any further attempts to intimidate or harass me would be documented as harassment. That same week, my sister tried to get around being blocked. She created a fake profile on a new platform and sent me a message pretending to be someone asking for grief advice. But it was obvious, same writing style, same phrasing, same pattern of pretending to care before turning it into guilt. I reported the account immediately and changed all my security settings across every app and platform I used. Two-factor authentication, password resets, privacy toggles. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. My aunt reached out not long after and gently suggested hosting a sit-down conversation to air things out between everyone. I told her I appreciated the gesture, but I wasn't interested in a forced reconciliation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a series of choices that didn't leave room for repair. I was done being the one expected to bridge the gap. The last thing that happened that week hit harder than the rest. I visited my mom's grave for the first time since the scattering. I brought a fresh bouquet of her favorite flowers, orange tulips, and a small note folded in my jacket pocket. When I got to the headstone, I found two printed photos tucked into the edges of the marker. They were from the cliff trip. One showed my sister and father standing near the edge. The other was a group shot with the uncle in the background. They had placed those photos there like a stamp on her memory, as if that version of the farewell was the only one that counted. I didn't hesitate. I removed the photos, folded them, and put them in my bag without tearing or crumpling them. Then I laid down the flowers and placed the note I had written beside them. It said I never needed their permission to remember you, and then I walked away. A few weeks after the fundraiser, the anonymous speech I gave ended up being quoted in a caregiving blog. Someone had attended the event, written about it, and connected my words to a larger piece about grief and how family exclusion often happens after a death. It was a thoughtful post, not dramatic, just honest, and it started getting shared around in small grief support spaces online. It didn't take long for my sister to catch wind of it. Even though she deactivated her main account, she still had a presence on other platforms under slightly different names. One afternoon, she posted a vague status calling out anonymous storytellers who build fake sympathy off lies. A few people responded, but one reply changed everything. An old friend of hers replied publicly and attached screenshots, new ones I hadn't seen before. These messages were from just before the first memorial. In them, my sister talked about excluding me on purpose. She wrote that she needed a clean emotional break and that our father deserved peace after all the crying. The friend also confirmed that she'd lied to multiple relatives, saying I didn't want to come. The post blew up, not in a viral sense, but enough for people around us to finally see what had really happened. That same week, I received another letter through my lawyer. This time it came with a cease and desist notice from my father's legal team. It claimed that my ongoing participation in public events was painting the family in a negative light and demanded that I stop speaking or sharing stories related to my mother's death. I didn't even need to say anything. My lawyer handled it. He drafted a firm response pointing out that everything I'd said had been personal and anonymous, with no names named, and that continued legal pressure could be considered harassment. In our next therapy session, my counselor encouraged me to start journaling, not just the grief, but everything I could remember about the caregiving months. So I did. I wrote about meals I made, nights I stayed up with her, how she used to tap the walls softly when she needed water instead of calling out. I didn't write it for revenge or to share it online. It was just for me, to preserve what really mattered. Later, I was invited to speak on a grief panel, hosted by a support network focused on estrangement. The format was quiet and respectful, more about letting others know they weren't alone. I agreed and kept the focus on healing and identity after family rupture. No names, no pointing fingers. Meanwhile, my cousin, who had been living in housing tied to one of the relatives on my father's side, was told he had to move. No formal eviction, just enough pressure to make it clear he wasn't welcome anymore. I offered him the guest room in my apartment until he found a new place. He moved in the following week. We spent evenings going through everything. All the screenshots, messages, timelines, printed emails, saved voicemails, and the letter from my mom. We organized it into a file with labeled sections, one for documentation, one for backup evidence, and one for emotional closure. Not for revenge, just to have a record in case things escalated again. Around that time, my aunt reached out with an idea. She wanted to organize a second memorial. This time, it would only include people from my mother's side of the family. No announcements, no online posts, just a private, peaceful tribute focused on her life, not the conflict. I agreed, but with one condition: no photos, no videos, and no social media posts. She understood and fully supported it. The event was held in a small community center near the coast. There were handwritten letters people had written to my mother, her favorite piano music playing softly in the background, and simple floral arrangements made of tulips and lavender, her favorite. I brought the silver locket she had given me, placed it beside a framed photo of her from her 20s, and said nothing. Just being there was enough. Halfway through the memorial, the uncle from my father's side tried to walk in. He hadn't RSVP'd and hadn't spoken to me since the trip to the cliff. One of the venue staff, who had been warned ahead of time, intercepted him at the door and told him the event was private. He didn't argue, just turned around and left. At the end of the evening, people began leaving quietly. No big goodbyes, no staged photos, just a room slowly emptying as people carried memories home with them. As I walked out last, I felt something I hadn't felt at any family gathering before. Not forgiveness, not closure, but peace. Because for the first time, the goodbye had been on my terms. 2 months after the second memorial, a formal letter arrived at my apartment. It was an invitation to what they were calling a reconciliation dinner, organized by relatives on my father's side. It was phrased like a reunion, public, catered, held at a community center in town. The guest list included extended family, some old friends of my parents, and a few names I didn't recognize. At the bottom, there was a line that read, "Let's come together and move forward as one." I didn't respond right away. A few days later, I mailed a simple typed letter, 1 paragraph. No emotions, no drama. I stated clearly that I would not be attending, and I would not return to any setting with that side of the family until there was accountability, real accountability, for what had happened. 3 days after that, my sister posted a long entry on a personal blog she had quietly started. In the post, she positioned herself as the family scapegoat. She claimed I had twisted the story and isolated everyone, and that she had done everything she could to include me in the original memorial. She described herself as heartbroken, and said I had divided the family beyond repair. For the first few hours, the post received a few sympathetic comments, but then someone dropped a link in the replies, an archived travel log showing she was out of town the week she claimed to have tried to plan the trip with me. Then another person commented with screenshots from her earlier messages that had already been leaked showing she excluded me intentionally. Within a day, the entire blog post was deleted. Quietly. No update, no apology, just gone. Word got around among extended relatives. People who had stayed neutral started distancing themselves from her. One even reached out to me to say that while they didn't want to get involved, they could no longer pretend her version of events made sense. That same week, my manager at work pulled me aside. He had been following bits and pieces of what I'd shared in support circles and noticed the emotional strain. Without making it a big thing, he offered me a week of paid leave to recharge. I accepted. I used the time to attend a retreat a few hours out of town, designed specifically for people who had been primary caregivers. The retreat wasn't fancy or spiritual, it was practical. Small workshops, quiet cabins, and shared spaces where people could talk about the silence that comes after constant caregiving ends. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone there. They just understood. While there, I started outlining what might one day become a book. Not to expose anyone or relive the fight, but to help others who ended up on the outside after doing everything right. I sketched the chapters late at night and started filling them with short scenes from my experience. The moments that don't make headlines, the daily routines, the whispered jokes, the quiet shifts in the middle of the night. Back home, my cousin, still living with me, noticed the change. Inspired by the retreat, he signed up for therapy sessions of his own and began journaling. He told me he never really processed what being pushed out by half his family did to him until now. We decided to build something together. A private memory album just for us. It included photos of my mom, copies of her favorite recipes, old ticket stubs from family trips, handwritten notes, and even pressed flowers from her old garden. Each page told a part of her story that couldn't be rewritten. About 2 weeks later, a final registered letter arrived from my father. Inside was a long message dressed up in legal language, referencing family legacy and the burden of duty. The tone tried to pull guilt out of me, mentioning the family name, the history I was supposedly throwing away, and how I owed it to the bloodline to reconnect. I didn't read the whole thing. I sealed it back up, wrote a note on a yellow post-it, and stuck it to the envelope. Legacy means nothing without truth. Then I mailed it back. Not long after, a mutual friend passed along news that my sister had started therapy. Apparently, a few of her own friends told her point blank that she needed to take a hard look at how she handled things. She didn't reach out to me, and I didn't expect her to. I made no move to reconnect. Growth, if it happens, is something people do on their own, not something you watch for from the sidelines. At the end of that week, I wrote a small check to the hospice center where my mom spent her final days. Along with it, I included a card with a short message in blue ink. No name, no backstory. Just thank you for seeing her the way I did. Then I dropped it in the mailbox and walked home. A few weeks after mailing the donation to the hospice, I joined a local support group for adults dealing with both grief and family estrangement. The group met every Thursday evening in a small room behind a library. It was a mixed group. Some had lost parents, some had been cut off from siblings, some from children. No one gave advice. They just listened, and that made all the difference. I sat in the back the first few meetings, mostly silent, until one night a man shared how his family had erased him from his mother's funeral. That broke something open, and I started talking too. One afternoon, I came home to find a small padded envelope at my door. The return address was from one of my mother's oldest friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Inside was a bundle of old printed photos, some dating back to when I was a kid, and a few folded letters. One of them was addressed to me, written by my mom years ago, in handwriting that had already started to shake. In the letter, she talked about how proud she was of the way I handled hard things. She wrote about moments I didn't even realize she had noticed. That letter went straight into the memory album my cousin and I had built, sealed in a sleeve next to a photo of her favorite garden. The letter made me think about a storage bin I had kept tucked away in the closet, one that held boxes from her room I had never fully gone through. I spent the rest of the day sorting it. Mixed in with old scarves, birthday cards, and expired prescriptions was another envelope. This one wasn't for me. It was addressed to my father but never mailed. The tone was different, sharp, clear, firm. She called out the emotional distance, the indifference, and how alone she felt at times even before her illness. I took a photo of it, sealed it in a separate folder, and handed the original over to my lawyer. Not for revenge, just in case anything related to the estate ever came up down the line. That same week, my cousin got news that he had been accepted into student housing at the local college. He'd been taking night classes since moving in with me, and now he had a chance to stay on campus. I helped him pack his bags, and when he left, he hugged me tight and said the quiet support had done more for him than anyone else in the family ever had. When he left, the apartment felt different, not empty, but still. With the quiet, I started something new. I cleared a patch in the backyard and built a small memory garden. I planted tulips, lavender, and rosemary, flowers my mom loved. I added a bench and a small solar light shaped like a hummingbird. It wasn't fancy, but every evening I sat there for a few minutes after dinner, sometimes with a cup of tea just listening to the wind. Not long after, I got an unexpected email from a relative on my mom's side I hadn't spoken to since the funeral. She apologized for not speaking up earlier and said she had believed what my sister told her at first. Now, after everything that had come to light, she regretted staying silent. She didn't ask for a meeting, just wanted to say she was sorry. That was enough. A week later, the hospice center contacted me. They were naming one of the volunteer wings after my mom, and they invited me to speak at the dedication. I said yes. As I prepared what I wanted to say, I was scrolling through a few online grief forums and noticed a post. It read like my story, specific phrases, certain events, even small emotional moments only someone close would know. The username was anonymous, but something felt off. I contacted the site admin and asked them to check. After reviewing the post, they agreed it violated the platform's rules for posting identifiable family situations and removed it immediately. A few days later, a letter came from my father's lawyer. It stated that due to irreconcilable disrespect, my father was formally severing all family ties. It was worded like a legal declaration, one last attempt to make things official. I handed it to my attorney and told him to add it to the existing file. He marked it for future reference to prevent any disputes over inheritance or unresolved estate claims. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't acknowledge it publicly or tell anyone except my lawyer. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't focused on being disowned. I had already stepped away long ago. Instead, I spent the weekend adding new plants to the garden, updating the memory album with fresh notes, and lighting the hummingbird lamp just before sunset. Everything else could stay where it was. My focus was on preserving what mattered, her memory, in quiet, honest ways. A few quiet months passed and I stayed busy, garden upkeep, work, therapy, writing. Then I got a call from the hospice director. They'd been finalizing parts of the estate paperwork, and something had come through. My mom had arranged a delayed donation through her will. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make an impact. Along with the funds, she'd left a handwritten note asking that a scholarship be created in her name, one small grant each year for a student studying to become a caregiver. The director asked if I'd be willing to help set it up. I agreed without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, I worked with their staff to establish what became known as the Marianne Caregiver Grant. The announcement was made quietly in the local paper's community section, credited simply to Marianne and her son. There was no mention of the past conflict, no mention of any family issues, just a paragraph honoring her legacy and supporting those walking a path she knew well. My aunt helped gather some photos for the hospice's wall of remembrance. She brought over old prints, clippings, and a few hand-stitched crafts my mom had made for volunteer events. One photo showed her holding a tray of cookies in the hospice kitchen, smiling wide, sleeves rolled up. Another showed her leading a small circle of volunteers in a gardening workshop. That one ended up framed on the wall beside her name, under a plaque listing her years of service. While organizing a few old files from the memory bin, I came across something I hadn't realized I saved, a backup of an old voicemail. It was from my mom, short, upbeat, her voice still full and steady. She had called to remind me about soup in the freezer and ended the message with a small laugh and the words, "You're doing better than you think." I transferred the recording to a small solar-powered audio frame I ordered online. I mounted it in the backyard memory garden, right beneath a cluster of lavender and rosemary. I set it to play just once at dusk. It became part of my routine, watering the plants, checking the soil, and hearing her voice once more as the day ended. One afternoon, while trimming back the overgrowth, a neighbor passed by and paused. She asked about the hummingbird light and the photo near the bench. I told her it was a garden in memory of my mom. She smiled and shared that her child had been cared for by the same hospice years ago. We stood talking for half an hour, swapping stories. It was the first time in a while I'd spoken about my mom to someone who hadn't known her but understood the environment she came from. That conversation nudged something open. A few days later, I reached out to a local grief support publication and started contributing essays anonymously. Just short pieces, reflections on caregiving, estrangement, and how grief doesn't follow rules. I didn't name anyone. I didn't mention the fallout. I just focused on what stayed behind. Around that time, my cousin pulled me aside. He looked frustrated. My sister had tried to contact him again. This time it was framed differently. She didn't message me directly, but asked him if he could start a conversation between us. Said she wanted to find a way back. He told her plainly that the bridge she wanted didn't exist anymore. She had burned it, and he wasn't going to be the one to rebuild it for her. He didn't even forward the message to me. He just wanted me to know in case she tried something else. The next invitation came from the hospice. They were unveiling a new wall of honor, a long wooden panel with engraved names of past volunteers. My mom's name was on it. I was invited to attend, and I did. The room was quiet, filled with soft music and the smell of fresh flowers. I stood in front of her name alone for a moment before someone tapped my shoulder. It was a nurse I barely recognized, one who had only met my mom during her final week. She hugged me briefly and whispered that she had never seen a son stay so present through it all. No cameras, no speeches, just that moment, standing by a name carved into wood, surrounded by people who remembered not the arguments, not the family split, but the care, the time, the effort. Later that night, I walked through the garden again, the voicemail playing quietly in the background. The wind moved through the rosemary and brushed the lavender gently against my leg. It became clear, not through some epiphany, but through the absence of noise, that nothing more needed proving. The validation I once searched for, trying to get others to understand, to justify how much I'd given, had already been mine. It came from the one person whose goodbye was real, whose love was steady, whose legacy now grew in petals and played softly every night at sunset. On the 1-year anniversary of my mother's passing, I packed a small bag before sunrise and drove to the cliffside. It was the same place they had scattered her ashes without me, just the sound of the ocean, wind brushing across dry grass, and the long drop to the rocks below. I brought a bouquet of lilies, the kind she always put on the windowsill every spring, and a small vial of soil from the memory garden in my backyard. I parked at the base of the path and made the walk alone. No ceremony, no camera, just one step after another, with the ocean growing louder the closer I got. When I reached the cliff's edge, I sat on a flat rock with the bouquet resting beside me. I poured the soil out into the wind and watched as it scattered like fine dust, carried over the sea and out of sight. I didn't speak. I didn't take a photo. I just sat and let the silence stretch out. I stayed there for a long time, long enough that shadows shifted and the light softened. It was the first time I had returned to that place not looking for closure or answers. There was no one to explain myself to anymore. I wasn't trying to rewrite anything. I was just there, present with no interruptions. That evening when I got home, there was a card in the mailbox, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a thank you note from one of the first recipients of the Mary Ann Caregiver Grant. She said the scholarship had helped her finish her final year of training and that my mother's name now meant something in her story too. She called her a light for those who help. I tucked the note between the pages of the memory album and quietly pulled out a photo of my mother. I hadn't displayed before, her sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, sun catching her hair just right. For the first time since she passed, I framed the photo and placed it above the mantel. It wasn't hidden away or part of a tribute corner. It was just there, open, permanent, part of the room like anything else that mattered. My cousin called later that week to let me know he had officially transitioned into campus housing. He had started attending support circles and sharing parts of his experience. Not just about what happened with our family, but about what it meant to rebuild trust, identity, and connection after that kind of fracture. He said people listened more than he expected. A few days later, I received an email from the grief organization that had hosted the panel I once spoke at. They asked if I'd be willing to lead the next season's discussion series, this time on the topic of loss and identity. I accepted, not because I felt like an expert, but because I had lived through it in all its messy layers, and I knew what it felt like to sit in the back of the room hoping someone might say something that made the weight feel lighter. That weekend, one of the older neighbors dropped by with a box. She'd been cleaning out her attic and found something labeled with my mom's name. Inside was a sealed envelope marked in my mother's handwriting, to be delivered someday. I opened it at the kitchen table, holding my breath without meaning to. Inside was just a single sentence written in thick pen: do not let them rewrite me, and do not let them rewrite you. I walked outside that evening and added a new plaque to the memory garden, right beneath the solar audio frame and the bench. The quote was carved into a small piece of stone and set into the soil under the flowers. The audio message still played every evening. Now it had company. A week later, I got formal notice from my father's estate lawyer. I had been officially removed from any inheritance. The document used phrases like irreparable damage and willful division of family. I signed the receipt without saying a word. After it was processed, I donated a portion of my own savings to double the scholarship fund under my mother's name. After all of it, every letter, every fight, every silence, I booked a solo weekend trip. No reason, No agenda. I chose a small cabin by a lake and spent 3 days without checking my phone, walking trails, eating simple meals, and listening to the wind rustle through tall trees. It wasn't for healing, it wasn't for mourning, it was just to be alone and not be sad about it. That night, sitting on the cabin steps and looking out across the still water, the last line of it all came to me. Something I had never said out loud but had carried from the very beginning. Asterisk. They took her ashes without me, thinking it would silence my grief. But they never realized I was never crying for them.